Before this story begins, imagine a land where survival was a daily battle, where loneliness could break even the strongest cowboy, and where one desperate choice could change a life forever. Tonight, you will witness a tale the Wild West tried to bury, a poor Apache widow, her starving children, and the moment she stood before a lonely cowboy and begged him to take her as his wife. This is a story of courage, heartbreak, and a bond born from pure survival. So make sure to subscribe, share, and comment, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the story ends. Let's get started. The sun was sliding behind the jagged teeth of the mountains when Jacob Reyes led his weary horse back toward his ranch. All day he had ridden fence lines, chased off coyotes, and tried to forget the echo of memories that never stopped following him. The land was quiet now, the kind of quiet that pressed against a man's ribs and made his heartbeat feel too loud. Dust clung to his boots, and sweat dried cold on his neck as he approached the small cabin he had lived in alone for nearly 5 years. He expected silence, emptiness, and the familiar ache of solitude. Instead, he saw movement. Near the well stood a woman and 2 children, thin, frightened, wrapped in worn buckskin that told him they were Apache. Jacob's hand instinctively drifted toward the holster on his hip, but he didn't draw. The woman stepped forward slowly, her body trembling though her expression remained strong. Her long dark hair was tangled, and her shawl was torn. The boy beside her held his sister's hand protectively, both of them staring at Jacob with eyes that carried more fear than childhood ever should. It was clear they had traveled far, suffered much, and expected little mercy from the world. Before Jacob could demand an explanation, the woman spoke in careful English. Her voice was quiet, but carried the firmness of someone who had learned to survive pain. She told him her name was Nailina, that her husband had been killed in a raid by a rival band, and that the new chief had cast her out, calling a widow with children a burden. She spoke of walking for days with no shelter, no food, and no one willing to offer even a sip of water. The desert wind whistled through the ranch yard as she spoke, and Jacob found himself wondering how they were still standing at all. Jacob dismounted slowly, keeping his voice calm as he asked how they ended up at his ranch. Nailina looked him in the eyes, searching for any sign of danger or kindness. She explained that she had followed the faint trail of cattle tracks, hoping they would lead to someone, anyone, who might offer help. Her son was injured, her daughter weak from exhaustion, and all she wanted was a safe place for them to rest. The little girl clung to her mother's leg, her small feet bruised and bleeding from walking barefoot across miles of unforgiving ground. He didn't know what came over him then, pity, compassion, or the simple instinct to help the helpless. Jacob gestured for them to follow him inside. His cabin wasn't much, just a single room with a narrow bed, a table, and a stone fireplace, but it was warm. He gave the children water first, then a piece of cornbread left over from the morning. They ate in silence, as if afraid the food might disappear if they dared to breathe too loudly. Jacob watched them carefully, feeling a strange tightening in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. When the children finally fell asleep curled together on the floor, Nailina approached Jacob with a steadiness that surprised him. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, yet her voice did not shake. She said plainly, "You are alone. You have land, a home, and food. I have nothing. Take me as your wife and my children as your family." Jacob froze, unsure if he understood her correctly. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for affection. She was bargaining with the last thing she had, herself, because the lives of her children depended on it. Her bravery, or perhaps her desperation, hit him harder than gunfire. Jacob tried to argue, telling her marriage wasn't something to ask out of survival, but Nailina shook her head firmly. She told him she did not want romance, nor promises of love. She wanted safety, protection, and a place where her children wouldn't starve or freeze. She would cook, clean, work, and never ask for more than a roof and peace. Jacob felt his breath catch when she added softly, "I know loneliness. I see it in your eyes." Those words struck something buried deep inside him, something he had buried the day he lost his wife and unborn child. He told her they would talk again in the morning, but he didn't sleep that night. Long after the fire died down, Jacob sat in his chair staring at the 2 small shapes sleeping on the wooden floor. Their faces were sunburnt and thin, their hands small and fragile. He thought of his own child who never had a chance to breathe. He thought of how quiet the cabin had been all these years, how empty every corner felt. And then he thought of the woman who had walked into his life without warning, asking for nothing but a chance to keep her children alive. When dawn broke, Jacob gave the children clean clothes from an old storage chest. He showed the boy how to scatter feed for the chickens, and the girl shyly stroked Jacob's old cattle dog, who wagged his tail as if welcoming her. The sight of them, laughing softly, moving through the ranch as though they belonged, pulled at something in Jacob's spirit, something he believed had long since withered away. Even Nalina, though silent, seemed lighter as she worked beside him, helping without being asked, as if she had already begun making the place her home. Later, Jacob stepped outside to think. The land stretched out before him, wide, lonely, endless, and he realized he was tired of hearing only his own voice, tired of eating alone, tired of living each day with nothing but silence and memories. When he walked back inside and saw Nalina waiting, hands clasped, eyes uncertain, he finally spoke the words that would change all their lives. If you stay as family, not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as my wife. And your children as my own. Are you sure this is what you want? Nalina breathed out softly and nodded. Yes, I am sure. And in that quiet, fragile moment, the lonely cowboy's life began to change. The days that followed were unlike anything Jacob had experienced in years. The quiet he once knew was replaced by the soft footsteps of children, the gentle hum of Nalina working around the cabin, and the unfamiliar feeling of purpose returning to his bones. At first, he felt like a stranger in his own home, unsure of where to stand or how to exist with people around him again. But the children adjusted quickly, and somehow their presence made the cabin feel warmer, fuller, as though life had seeped back into its walls. Chaska followed Jacob everywhere, watching him work with a seriousness far beyond his age, while little Tala clung to the cattle dog like he was her guardian. Despite the fragile peace forming between them, Jacob knew the West did not forgive easily. Word traveled fast across open land, especially about an Apache woman living with a white cowboy. By the third day, riders from a nearby town passed close enough to the ranch to see figures moving outside the cabin. They didn't stop, but Jacob spotted them whispering as they rode away. Trouble, he knew, had a scent, and it was already drifting toward them on the wind. Still, he refused to send Nalina and the children away. A promise was a promise, and Jacob Reyes was a man who stood by his word. Nalina sensed the shift as well. Her hands grew tense when the wind carried the distant sound of hooves, and she kept the children closer. One evening, while she helped Jacob tend the horses, she spoke softly, almost as if afraid of breaking the moment. You do not have to protect us if it brings danger to your door. Jacob shook his head firmly. This is your home now. Danger comes sooner or later to men like me anyway. Might as well fight for something that matters. She looked at him for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Respect, gratitude, perhaps even the faintest spark of hope. On the fifth morning, the real test arrived. 3 men rode up the trail, dust clouding behind their horses. Their faces were familiar, ranchers from the neighboring valley, men who had never liked Jacob much and liked Apache even less. They halted near the corral, staring coldly at Nalina as she stood behind Jacob with the children close to her legs. One man spat tobacco into the dirt and said, "Heard you took in a squaw and her brats. Folks are talking." Jacob kept his voice calm. Folks always talk, doesn't make it their business. The second man leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. Might be, but strangers on this land bring trouble. We don't want Apache around here. They attract the wrong kind of attention. Jacob stepped closer to the riders, blocking their view of Nalina. "She's my wife," he said evenly. "And these kids are mine too. Any problem you have with them, you have with me." The men exchanged looks, surprised by the firmness in his voice. The first rider gave a harsh laugh. "Your wife? Since when do you marry outside your kind?" Jacob didn't flinch. "Since 5 days ago, and that's all you need to know." A long silence followed. Finally, the third rider muttered something under his breath, turned his horse, and motioned for the others to follow. But as they left, one of them called back, "This ain't over, Reyes. People won't like it." As their figures disappeared into the hills, Jacob felt Nalina's hand rest gently on his arm. "You did not need to do that," she whispered. But he shook his head. "I did. And I'll do it again if I have to." From that moment on, something changed between them. Not love, not yet, but a mutual understanding born from shared danger. She began trusting him in small ways, asking his thoughts, learning the rhythms of the ranch and mending clothes he didn't even know were torn. And Jacob found himself watching her, not with pity, but with a quiet admiration for her strength and the grace with which she carried her burdens. One evening, after tucking Tala and Chaska into the small bed Jacob had built for them, Nalina stepped outside and found Jacob sitting alone on the porch. The sky above them burned orange and lavender as the sun dipped low behind the mesas. She sat beside him without speaking, letting the silence settle naturally. After a while she said softly, "I am sorry for forcing this life upon you. You deserved a choice, not desperation." Jacob kept his eyes on the horizon. Maybe. But sometimes desperation brings the right people together. She turned to him, surprised, but he didn't meet her gaze. He wasn't ready for that, not yet. As days passed, the family found a rhythm. Chaska learned how to ride, getting the horse with a mixture of fear and excitement, while Jacob held the reins beside him. Tala helped Nalina in the kitchen, humming little tunes she remembered from her people's camps, and Jacob found himself smiling more small, shy smiles he thought he had forgotten how to make. The nights were quiet but no longer lonely. The cabin no longer echoed. It breathed, lived, and held warmth like it never had before. But the peace couldn't last forever. A month after Nalina arrived, rumors spread that a small group of renegade Apache warriors were raiding ranches to the west. Fear gripped nearby settlers, and suspicion turned quickly toward Jacob's ranch. One morning, as Jacob saddled his horse, a group of townsfolk arrived, rifles slung over their shoulders. They claimed they wanted to search his home to ensure he wasn't hiding the raiders. Jacob's patience snapped. He stood tall, shoulders squared, and told them they would set foot on his property only over his dead body. His voice carried such force that even the brashest among them hesitated. And then something Jacob didn't expect happened. Nalina stepped out beside him. She faced the armed men without trembling, her chin high, her eyes unwavering. "If you fear my people," she said clearly, "then fear me also. But we are not raiders. We are only trying to live." Her courage stunned the men. One by one their barrels lowered, and without another word they left. Jacob watched her with astonishment, admiration warming his chest. "You are braver than any person I've known," he told her quietly. Nalina smiled, a faint, delicate smile that softened the hard lines of her grief. As winter approached, Jacob realized he no longer thought of Nalina as a burden he'd taken in out of pity. She was part of his life, woven into the quiet spaces he once filled with ghosts. One snowy night, after the children had fallen asleep, Nalina approached him while he sat near the fire. She hesitated only a moment before reaching out and touching his hand. Her voice was a whisper, "Thank you for giving us a life." Jacob turned his hand over, fingers brushing hers gently. "Thank you for giving mine back." The flames crackled softly. Outside, snow fell across the silent land. Inside, in that small warm cabin, two lonely souls who had once believed their lives were over discovered that healing sometimes comes not with time, but with people who walk into your life when you least expect them. And so the cowboy who had lost everything found a family, and the widow who had feared death found hope. Together, on a harsh and unforgiving frontier, they built a life not born of convenience or desperation, but something deeper, quieter, and far more enduring. A home forged by survival and slowly, gently transformed into love.